Hello, everyone. Good to see you. It seems like only 6 months ago I was here on kind of the same mission, talking to everyone about some of the things that are going on as far as digital innovation, and some of the things that I've seen both as a publisher, working in the publishing world, working in the support area of publishing worlds that should be of interest to you. My first trip here was kind of a whirlwind for me, and I wasn't quite as prepared for some of the things that you asked. And I think I'm a bit more prepared this time because I did a little bit more research on Africa and emerging markets and exactly what it is the group here assembled has to work with, and it is somewhat amazing to me. So let me just jump in. Yeah, here we go. So starting with Gutenberg, we got a little bit faster presses, higher speed presses, being able to distribute content electronically to devices, to readers, to what's next. And what's next has become pretty obvious as far as I'm concerned. What's next is that most of us have the whole world in our hands. Literally 24 hours ago, I was on a different continent, halfway around the world. I land here, and I've still got in my hand all the information I had before. And this is a wave that is affecting publishers that I've mentioned many times before, that it's one of the forces in the world that you've got nothing to do with, but has tremendous influence on what it is you do and how you should approach your markets, or how you can approach your markets. I'm not going to preach and say how you should do anything. The fact that there's so many people out there who are in a position now to consume the things that you publish is astonishing. And it's caused a lot of rethinking and a lot of angst, I think, in certain publishers as they've looked at what it is they need to do. And so I'm going to go quickly through just some of the stats that I've seen. Over 5 billion devices worldwide that can receive content, and it's only going to continue to grow. A lot of these charts and graphs came from organizations that are kind of self-serving, that they sell either space or they sell the devices themselves. But that's a huge market, and even if we dig down into it, there's a big firm, Kleiner Perkins, it's a venture capital group that's very interested in what's going on in publishing. And they've looked at this and they said, wow, look, in India, close to 60% of the internet traffic is on a mobile device. And I suspect that when that's measured in South Africa or Africa and some of the other countries in Asia, that they'll see just as much. So it's well beyond the internet traffic that comes from desktops. Tablets, phones are all skyrocketing. And basically this is the equivalent of, as far as I'm concerned, having a bookstore or a branch of a bookstore in everybody's pocket as far as publishers are concerned. And it doesn't matter if you're a trade publisher or if you're in the STM world or even educational publishers. One of the interesting things that I never saw coming from the US was the lag between smartphones and feature phones. And Wes was the first to point that out to me when I was talking to him about his business. And we see that changing, that utility and basic phones will continue to be sold, but they are a part of the market that you need to look at if you're a publisher. Meanwhile, smartphones and all the things they can do are going to continue to explode. As electronic prices come down, as the cost of bandwidth comes down, we'll see this only grow. If you look at data usage in sub-Saharan Africa, it is absolutely screaming upwards. And it's kind of a dense chart with a lot of information, but there's a couple of things. This is from Ericsson, which is a big manufacturer of distribution devices. They expect to see the 65% growth in traffic. And what is this traffic going to be? It's going to be video, it's going to be content, it's going to be all kinds of things that you as a publisher can provide or should be helping to provide in the marketplace. the biggest increase was in some of the other countries other than South Africa. But on year, here is a force that is going to affect the publishing industry that you should be aware of. Going back to the conversation about what kind of devices people have, it's interesting that when this was written, 67% of this audience only had like 2G or SMS services, but still that's going to change. We'll see LTE, we'll see other things come in as more and more infrastructure is built. So you should be prepared for that and able to move forward into that, into delivering the content. If we look at mobile penetration by region, and this is who has subscriptions, hopefully you can read this, who has subscriptions. Now there are some parts of the world where it's like people have more than one car, people have more than one phone with subscription. If you look and see South Africa, 67%, in South America, 124% penetration. So 25% of the people there have more than one device. That's the only way that makes sense. So there's a huge market there in South America that can be approached by publishers. You look at where there's broadband or the availability to send pictures and multimedia, things of that nature. If the world averages, excuse my language, I've gotten to the point now where I need glasses sometimes, but not all the time. So a lot of this goes on. The world average is 21%, it says, of where there is broadband penetration as of January. Africa is at 7%. It means there's a huge growth potential, especially for folks who are waiting on broadband to help them out. Central America is only at 8%. North America, leads the way. If you look at mobile usage in Africa, as a whole, it's rather interesting that 61% of the people in rural Africa have some way of communicating with mobile usage. And probably the 2G people will on SMS, but still it's a tremendous opportunity. 7% using social network, and 67% of mobile penetration. It seems that Nigeria and South Africa are some of the most studied, and so there's some better statistics for that. So Nigeria looks like it's split 50-50 with a much larger mobile penetration percentage. South Africa actually switches urban and rural as far as the penetration, and actually has a much higher. So there's 150% of you guys have more than one device on a network for this to come out to be so high. And as I said before, there's no one in sight. Device sales, whether it's smartphones, whether it's tablets, whether it's personal computers, although they're on the wane, are going to continue to grow. If we look at who's using what as far as a device, as far as the operating system, Android still leads the way, and I think it will continue to do so, even though Apple is, or the iPhone is making a bit more of an inroads. We'll find that more and more of the least expensive devices will be using an Android type system, and others is almost nobody now. When we looked at what kind of content was consumed on these mobile devices, it's rather interesting. Some people are interested in crime news and celebrities. When you look at India and see that their top five, one of their top content category was movies, well, it now makes sense how come so much of their bandwidth is consumed by mobile devices. Everyone's looking at movies on their phones. But it just gives you an idea of the spectrum and the areas that people are using their mobile devices to consume content. I am most disheartened to see that in the United States that the #1 news was to look up celebrities. and the number 2 was crime news. But anyhow, it gives you an idea of what's out there, what's being consumed. So there's an organization called the organization Online Publishers Associations that basically looked at their user base and found out a couple of things, like we talked before. 95% of smartphone content consumers downloaded apps, and 14% of those were paid. Well, 14% of the billions and millions of phones out there is a big number. So it gives you hope that if you've got some sort of content, you can get paid for it. Android leads iOS, we talked about that. Once again, smartphone users actually pay for their content. 24% reported that they have purchased content. If you're in the video business, 22% for video, 21% for books, so a big number. Smartphone is the preferred media device for many. In a past life, I spent, not to say I wasted a couple of years of my life putting medical reference books on PDAs, which was a profoundly inappropriate use of that technology and the content. But of course, that has switched back around now, and there's all kinds of ways to put this kind of information, as far as book content is concerned, on smartphones or even tablets. Smartphone users watch lots of video. I know I don't, but I know I can't ride the bus or the tube or someplace, and somebody is not watching some show on their phone. And then finally, smartphone users are cross-platform. In other words, they use not only their phone, they use a PC, they use a tablet, they use a TV or whatever. So, they're open to receiving this content through many different manifestations. Quickly go through tablets because they're very important. Most people with tablets that I know use tablets all the time, live with them, sleep with them, probably bathe with them. And I'm sure you all know someone that's always on their iPad, or always on their tab, or whatever they're on, always on it. 90% watch video, some sort of short video. And that's probably the only place I watch video, is news clips, things like that. Paid apps, 23% of tablet apps were paid for. Big number. It says the market has doubled in 2012. Sorry, this is so old, but this is the only place we can get the information. I'm sure it's up way more than that. Once again, they're cross-platform consumers. If you're a tablet user, you also have a smartphone you use, you also have a computer. And what that means is that most people are interested in consuming content fairly the same way across all of those different devices. They don't want to have to re-log in, they don't want to see it in a different format, they want to see it and use it the same way. So, if you're a publisher, and we've looked at how telephones, how telephony, how content distribution has evolved over time, what's your best strategy? How do you take advantage of what I was speaking to somebody at the tea break was about? This is no longer a push-pull thing now. It's a pull. There is enough people with enough devices to receive content that you create to make it very worth your while. So what's the best strategy to come up with? So of course, in true consultant times, I say it depends. It depends on which part of the elephant you've got in your hands. Maybe you can't sell the entire book. Maybe you can only sell a part of the book. Maybe you should be looking at video. Maybe you should be looking at questions. Maybe if you're in the educational industry, you should be looking at test preparation. There's all kinds of things that are available as far as avenues to leverage the tremendous amount of content receiving devices that are out there. And so, every publisher I know that I've worked with, that I work for, they all have some sort of business going on around a mobile initiative. And to speak to the last panel that was up here, this is one of the areas where many startups and outsource firms actually get a good foothold within these organizations, because publishers have a great deal of what I like to call corporate inertia. That they've done what Burns, or Ben said they've been successfully broken for a number of years, so what are they going to change? not of corporate inertia, but wanted to bring in people to talk to them about how to work on maybe a mobile initiative of some sort. At the same time, most publishers have some sort of successful online or publishing, e-publishing program in place. Whether it's a website, whether it's smartphones and apps, just an e-reader, replica digital editions, or PDFs under glass. And many publishers are producing iPad, iPhone, Kindle. We can take a look off of there, and we're not noticing that anymore. Believe it or not, BlackBerry still lives on. It lives on big time in the U.S. still. It lives big time in the government and medical fields. I know a lot of people who are still producing for BlackBerry. And of course, Android. So if you're a publisher, you do all of these things that you see here. You create content. In some cases, it has to be converted. It has to be marked up. It has to be enhanced. You need to manage it. You need to distribute it. It used to be simple. Distribution was paper. Conversion was just an XML to end up on a website. Nowadays, the entire process that you see ahead of you or in front of you has been changed by e-products and e-distribution. I'm often asked about the design characteristics necessary for successful electronic learning. The sort of instructional design needs to go in. And I'll talk about that in just a little bit. Conversion. Done correctly, you convert product one time, and you have many, many ways that you can distribute it. You can distribute pieces and parts of it. You can reassemble it. You can look across your entire catalog and put together products, all of which can go to the various devices we talked about. Markup is just as important. If it's marked up properly, it can be found. To be found, to do mix and match. It can be found on Google. It can be found in the areas where people need or are looking for this content. When I say enhancement, I talk about all the media, and I'll talk about that in just one minute. All the other things that you done on smart devices, smartphones, things of that nature. How do you manage all of this content once you've created it? It's no longer just a Dewey Decimal System. You have a chapter in a book on science. How does that relate to a chapter in another book you might have on science? I know a very successful startup that is leveraging publishers' content by being able to understand what chapters in a book are about. So if you're an accounting student and you're looking at a Pearson book on accounting at chapter 5, they understand what that's about. And if you're having trouble understanding that content, they know another book in their library, their aggregator, that they can refer you to and say, listen, if you don't know how Professor so-and-so handled this accounting concept, here is the same concept looked at a different way. Oh, and by the way, we've got all the test questions necessary for you to understand whether or not you understand that, because we understand what this content is about, not just what it says, but what it's about. That enhancement and management is very important. And it plays into distribution as well. I don't know if any of the people here fall into this category, but I've worked with, and I have as clients right now, a number of organizations whose content does not exist in any way or shape until it is delivered based on a query from one of their customers. Think about that. They have great repositories of content. You ask a question to a publisher, and it assembles a response that is completely transitional and is yours and yours alone, and then it's gone. If you think about legal publishers and the work that they do, if you think about content aggregators, if you think about research companies, being able to look into great amounts of content, boy, that clock is ticking down, looking into great amounts of content, understand, and to respond to a customer and send them a specific, based on their query, response is important. I've broken it. This is my cheesy slide that says, back in the day, if you wanted to help your customers distribute content, you needed this stuff. You needed a warehouse, you needed trucks, you needed guys with pallets to build around. And it's not just the future, but it's now. All you need to help distribute content is a rack of servers and a good distribution network. Big difference. And actually, if you think about before, you could only distribute content as the whole, in the whole book. Now you can distribute the chapter, you can distribute the section, you can distribute whatever the bit or byte of content that a person needs. So when I'm talking to publishers, what are they asking about their e-products and their e-initiatives? And this kind of folds back into what we were talking about in the previous session. The term we use is low friction. They're willing to experiment, but they don't want to cannibalize existing sales. They want it to be simple. They don't want to do anything more. We talked about how busy publishers are. Well, they are very busy. They want it to work on all these different platforms. One of the biggest questions I used to get when I'd speak to a group like this is just starting into that. So, John, do we want to do Adobe? Do we want to do Amazon? Do we want to do whatever? And I say, hey, wait a minute. What do your customers have? That's your starting point. You need to make some of these decisions as opposed to thinking you're going to be a shotgun approach. So, are we going to address all the different platforms that are possible? It has to be global. More and more people are finding that some of their content sales are coming from parts of the world that they didn't know was even interested in their content. I can tell you from Elsevier's experience, the consumption in Asia was astonishing to them. So astonishing that they've actually set up operations there to follow up. And it has to make some economic sense. It can't be a lost leader, but it also doesn't have to be a home run. So just when they say they want it to be simple and easy and low friction, here's all the things they have to contend with. Different output formats. What are the device formats? What are the different things as far as flowable, reflowable? All of these questions. If you have media enhancements, if you're using animations, if you're using videos, if you're using audios, if you're in the educational business and you have interactive exercises, citations, links, all the other things that come to be expected in content, really ups the ante as far as how you distribute and how you create your digital content. All these things, it's hard enough to get a book written. I can tell you it's hard enough to get a book written, but to think that all the other things we're talking about have their own production cycle. Where do the questions come from the interaction quizzes? We did that video. Once you've done all these things electronically, you better QA it, or else you're going to have a lot of angry people on your hands. So within an organization now, within your editorial groups, within your publishing groups, who owns all of this? Who owns that production? Who owns the integration? Who owns the QA or what we call graceful degradation, where maybe you've written something for an iPad, what happens when you put it on an iPhone? It's not quite as big. How do you make sure your user experience is just as good? As I alluded to before, if you've got all this content digitally, hopefully you can manage it. And believe me, be able to describe and categorize your content. We talked a little bit about controlling and protecting assets. This talks not only about DRM, but it also talks about some of the controls that work around having digital rights. Sometimes you have digital rights for photos, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you have it for charts and graphs, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you don't have the digital rights for the text itself. All of this needs to be kept and kept track of. And then what assets are dynamic, what can be used all the time and reach into a repository and send out. And then sometimes you might want to edit something in bulk. All swans aren't white. They found some black ones someplace. So now you have to edit every place, everywhere in all of your books that talk about white swans. Is there an easy way to do that? Well, electronically there is. This is a very dense slide, and I'm going to go through them quickly, but basically, one of the things, if you're not looking at HTML5 as part of your publishing strategy, you need to be, because it's very important, and it answers a lot of the questions that we talked about. It answers some business questions, it answers some technological questions, and some distribution questions. And I'll make sure these slides are available so everybody, please don't be trying to write all this down. I'd say that the number one thing for HTML5 that I like, and that we're seeing traction with, is the multi-platform support. We're seeing that there's very few restrictions in it if you follow the HTML5 guidelines. And we find that we can very well distribute mobile content either in app form or to most any device that supports a browser these days. There's technology drivers, once again, this is fairly dense, but we'll just talk about the fact that there's a lot of common code available for HTML5 that allows you not to have to reinvent the wheel as you move forward with this content. It's built for better search engine optimization. And because it's kind of the hot, sexy way of doing things now, if you're heavily involved in HTML5, you have the chance to retain an engineering team that maybe you wouldn't be able to retain before. And to some extent, it kind of future-proofs the content. And it future-proofs the content primarily for this next slide. And this is something else. If you're not involved with the IDPF and EPUB and the EPUB standards, are you going to bring a hook and smash me off, or what happens now? Okay. If you're not involved with the IDPF and the EPUB standards, you should be, because there's already a bunch of smart people out there working on the same problems you have. When I was at Elsevier, I thought I worked in isolation on things. When I left Elsevier and became more of a service provider, I found out that everybody I talked to had the same problems, and pretty much, the same answer set was available for them. So, two things: HTML5, IDPF, and EPUB. If you're a publisher and you're faced with electronic issue, it's not you, somebody in your organization needs to know about this. And just real briefly on things that we've seen, or that I've seen, really are important in the publishing industry itself, for you as a publisher. You have to embrace collaboration with the nerds if you're a publisher. I've seen things where actually a programmer now sits on an editorial team to make sure that they're not dreaming up things that cannot be done, or can only be done in a way that is not scalable. Yeah. The product strategy. Many times I'm now seeing content which is being conceived to be both digital and print. I mentioned the cultural change, and it's huge, believe me. Communication review. There's a different type of change management and control necessary than you're used to in producing books. And that last slide, bullet there, develop a proof file of concept with stakeholders and sponsorships, basically is the corporate fail fast. How quickly can you put together proofs of concepts that can be signed off on to move fast? There's a term used in programming called agile programming, where basically it's an iterative process that happens almost on a daily basis in extreme cases. Well, I've actually seen this put to use in the publishing world, as far as being able to use a daily iteration of what content should and would look like in publishing. I'm sure we'll get into this in the sessions on education, but developing for education has taken a huge change across the board as far as I've seen, that we're moving away from books on something to almost discrete learning objects. In other words, what's the smallest measurable bit of content that you can teach somebody? I like to say, if you teach somebody how to tie their shoes, well, what's the first thing you have to do? They have to put the shoes on, and there has to be laces, and you have to go, what's the smallest discrete part of that you can come up with? And once you come up with that, can you build it in a way that it can be integrated into other content as well? So we look at content modules, which maybe can be assembled into pages if it's a print product, which then are content modules which can be assembled into lessons, and these lessons into courses, and then whole courses into curricula. Okay. But none of these pieces are designed for a particular curriculum. They happen to end up there based on how they're assembled. And then money. There's all kinds of ways to spend money. Of course, there's basic content production necessary. If you've got conversions, if you converted content, you have to QA it. It has to be uploaded and device specifically tested. If you're using somebody's delivery platform, you need to test on that as well. How are you going to sell it? In the various app stores, do you sell it directly? You have a subscription model, you have trials, you have vouchers, things of that nature. So what we've seen as far as successful models of this. People who make content available simply are more complex on all of the various platforms. Android, Apple, sometimes leveraging HTML5 to make sure they have a good desktop experience as well. There's a concept I call ingest and adjust. That's where you ingest content that already exists and you adjust it to be electronic. And the adjustment is where the markup happens, is where all the magic happens, it allows you to find it. But your content should be able to contain audio and visual, hyperlink the displays, be able to bookmark it, have footnotes, you should be able to link it internally, you should be able to distribute it any place you want, and don't discount the desktop because it's still out there as far as someplace your content should end up as electronic content. And it should be integrated into a single user account across all the modalities that is distributed. So I don't want to have to sign in every time I'm on a different device for the same specific content. This is a shocker in some parts of the world. I give this, especially in the US, but there are languages out there that are not ASCII, and so you better have support if you want to be in some of the growth areas for Chinese, for Japanese, for Korean, for Arabic, for all the other languages. And so there should be a progressive solution. You should see not a lot of risk as far as a low setup. You should have applications that can be sold in stores, in subscription purchases, but you should have applications that can be sold outside of the main stores. And the reason you want to be in the main stores is because for most people that's the way your content will be found first. And once it's found, you've got a much bigger add-on sale component if you're able to sell it outside of those stores. Especially if you make it future-proof it on platforms and devices. Have your own app in store. Somebody has to handle the money matters. You can hire somebody out to do that, or you can do it internally. You should have full analytics on how the content is sold, and in some cases, actually on how it's used. We can still track, actually what page people are on, how long they spend time on pages. There's a lot of analytical information out there that can help a publisher in creating new products. And I'll leave you with this shot here. These two gentlemen have traded places on the richest person in the world list a couple of times now. Does everybody know who that is?
Carlos.
Yeah, Carlos Slim, who is in what? Telecommunications, and Bill Gates, who's in technology. So, that'd be a closing thought on, there is money in this. What do you think? Thank you.